Welcome back to Nightmare Situations, where we explore the darkest corners of history, true mysteries and terrifying events, but remind us of how fragile life can truly be. Tonight we step into the icy wilderness of Soviet Russia in 1959. A group of young hikers, bright students, skilled outdoorsmen, embark on what should have been an adventure of a lifetime, but instead they vanish into the mountains, only to be found later in circumstances so bizarre, so disturbing, that more than 60 years later, the world still has no clear answers. Their tent was slashed open from the inside, their bodies were scattered around in the snow, some barefoot, some missing eyes, and one even a tongue. The official explanation? A compelling natural force. This is one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Our story begins at the Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, 23 years old, an engineering student with a passion for adventure and an eye for detail. He was meticulous, carrying out a homemade stove for warmth and keeping logs in every stage of the trip. Dyatlov's team included Lyudmila Dubinina, 20 years old, one of the toughest in the group. She had once finished the trek despite being shot accidentally by a hunter. Zinaida Komrigorova, 22, lively, always smiling in the photographs. Rustem Slobodin, 23 years old, an athlete and a skilled long-distance runner. Alexander Kolvatov, 24, and known for his technical mind. The next was Yuri Doroshenko, 21 years old and remembered for his incredible strength. Nikolai Brignol, 23, and a civil construction student. The next was the oldest in the group, Semyon Zolotarov. He was 38 years old, a mysterious last-minute addition to the group, and he was a decorated World War II veteran. Yuri Krivonishenko was 23 and known for his sense of humour. And finally, Yuri Yudin, who would turn back early due to sciatica and would be the only one to live to tell the tale. The hikers weren't reckless teenagers. They were experienced, disciplined and physically prepared. Their planned route was a 300-kilometre ski trek to Mount Atorton, which was officially graded as Category 3. That's the most difficult level available. For Dyatlov's team, there was a significant chance to earn an elite certification as Masters of Sports in Tourism. They set off on the 27th of January 1959, unaware that only one of them would ever come home. The first days were ordinary. Photographs showed the group laughing, singing and joking in the snow. They made diary entries noting how harsh the weather was, but they were keeping their spirits high. One diary entry read, "Sun is shining, the weather is wonderful, we are having fun." On January 28th, Yuri Yudin turned back. His leg pain had got too severe for him to continue with the expedition. He hugged his friends goodbye and made his way back down. Decades later, he would say that it felt as though he had been given a second chance at life. The remaining 9 pressed forward, and on February 1st they reached the slope of a mountain called Kiat Syakhl by the indigenous Mansi, which chillingly translates to the Mountain of the Dead. Instead of camping in the forest below, where the trees offered them shelter from the wind and snow, they chose to stop mid-slope and set up their tent on open ground. Why? Now that's a question that people have been asking for decades now. Some believe that they wanted to practice camping in the difficult conditions. Others believe it was poor visibility that forced them to stop exactly where they were. But to this day, no one knows the answer. And that night, something happened. Something so terrifying that it made 9 seasoned hikers slash their way out of their own tents, abandoning their boots, their coats, and all of their supplies, to run half naked into a snowstorm. 11 days later, so now on the 12th of February, their group had still failed to send word back to their families, so their families understandably grew very anxious. By the 20th, official search teams were dispatched, including students, volunteers, soldiers and helicopters, to look for the missing group. On the 26th, rescuers finally spotted the tent. It was half buried in snow, slashed open from the inside. Their boots, jackets, and even their food was untouched. It looked as though they had fled in a panic. Footprints led downhill towards the forest, some barefoot, some in socks, and others with only one shoe. After about 500 metres, the tracks disappeared under the fresh snow. Under a large tree before a sedge, the first two bodies were found. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Kivonychenko were both barefoot, dressed only in their underwear. Their hands were torn and bloody, as though they had clawed at the bark to climb. Nearby there was a small fire which had burned down to the ashes. A short distance away lay Dyatlov, Zinaida and Slobodin. They seemed to have been crawling back towards their tent. It took another 2 months to find the remaining 4. They were discovered in a ravine under several feet of snow. These final bodies revealed injuries so severe that they defied explanation. The autopsies were shocking. Doroshenko and Kivonychenko, the first round of autopsies, had burnt skin and blackened faces. This was likely from lying too close to a fire, but strangely, one of them had bitten off part of his own hand, as though he was in agony. Slobodin's skull showed a fracture, but investigators believed it wasn't enough to be fatal. Zinaida had bruises and abrasions consistent with a struggle. Dyatlov's body showed signs of violent pressure as though he had been held down. But for the ravine group, now their injuries were nightmarish. Nikolai had a massive skull fracture. Dabina's ribs were crushed inwards as though by an immense force. Her eyes were missing, and also her tongue was gone. Zolotarov's chest was shattered, but again no external wounds to match the internal trauma. Even more unsettling, traces of radioactivity were found in some of the hikers' clothing. Witnesses at the funerals reported that the bodies had a strange orange or tan coloration. Investigators wrote that the cause of death was a compelling natural force, but gave no further explanation. By May 1959, the case was quietly closed. Files were archived, witnesses silenced, but the rumours had already begun. For decades, people have debated what could have happened on the mountain. The first theory is the avalanche theory. Perhaps a small slab of avalanche struck the tent, forcing the hikers to flee. But then skeptics argue that the slope was too shallow and there was no classic avalanche debris. The next theory is katabatic winds, violent sudden winds known to strike mountains. They could have caused panic and disorientation. But could the wind alone explain the crushed ribs and missing eyes? Military testing is another popular theory. Some believe that the hikers stumbled across a secret Soviet weapons experiment, parachute mines or radiation. Strange glowing orbs were reported in the sky at the time. Some of the hikers worked in sensitive industries. Could they have seen something that they shouldn't have? The next theory is infrasound. Wind passing over a mountain that may have created low-frequency sound waves capable of inducing panic, hallucinations, and irrational behaviour. Was it an attack by the locals? The Mansi people were initially suspected, but there were no signs of hand-to-hand struggle, and the Mansi people had no motive to conduct such an attack. And finally, there's many paranormal theories connected to this event. They range from UFOs to Yeti attacks. Some point at the bizarre injuries and the glowing spheres as evidence that something beyond natural happened. No theory explains everything. Why slash your tent from the inside? Why run barefoot through the snow? Why the crushing injuries without the external wounds? And why the radioactive clothing? In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case. A year later, they concluded avalanche. They argued that snow conditions, slope angle, and poor visibility caused a delayed slab to release but pushed onto the tent. The injuries were consistent, they claimed, with a block of snow falling onto the hikers. But many Dyatlov researchers rejected this explanation, pointing out inconsistencies. If an avalanche forced them out, why didn't they retrieve their boots and coats once the danger had passed? Why were some of the bodies crushed while others weren't? To this day, scientists, historians, and amateur sleuths continue to argue. The Dyatlov Pass remains one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. 9 young hikers set out for an adventure and never returned. Their story has become legend, a blend of tragedy, mystery, and speculation that refuses to rest. The Dyatlov Pass Incident reminds us of how thin the line is between life and death, and how some mysteries may never be solved. What do you think happened? Avalanche? Secret weapons? Or something far stranger? Let us know your theory in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Nightmare Situations, because sometimes reality is more terrifying than any nightmare. Thank you for watching.